Well, it's time to get started, so we'll get right off to it. I'm pleased to introduce you to Justin Dahan. Justin's a first officer at PSA Airlines, and he'll be talking about bringing the next generation into our profession. With him, he has Mr. Barrington Irvin. Justin, please take it away.
My name is Justin Dahan, and I would like to thank each and every one of you for attending this conference today. It is a pleasure to be here, and even more of an honor to be moderating this conference on attracting the next generation to aviation. A little background on myself. As Paul said, I'm currently a first officer with PSA Airlines flying the Bombardier CRJ series aircraft based in Charlotte, North Carolina. I also volunteer with ALPA's National Education Committee and specialize with university outreach at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University's Daytona Beach campus, of which I myself am a graduate of. So this topic is very important to me. On this panel, you will have the opportunity to hear from Shannon Morrison, who works for the Center for Aviation Studies at The Ohio State University and is the coordinator of a fantastic program called the Career Eagles. We'll also have the opportunity to hear from Barrington Irvin, who is an inspirational gentleman who in 2007, at the age of 23, became the youngest person to ever fly solo around the world. Barrington also does a lot of work in new educational expeditions focusing around STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. While I could relate their personal accomplishments, I think it's better for them to discuss their accomplishments and goals on their own. After they have had the opportunity to present the important work they are doing and involved in, we will open the remaining time to any questions and discussions that you all may have. I'd like to start by talking about what the Airline Pilots Association is doing to attract the next generation into aviation. ALPA, along with most others in the industry, recognize the importance of attracting the next group of aviators. After all, without them, we cannot fill the openings that come from growth and the inevitable retirements. One of the things ALPA has done is to establish the Education Committee. The Education Committee's main purpose is to promote the piloting profession, mentor aspiring aviators, and help to bridge the gap between the education and line flying. One way in which we do this is the ALPA ACE Club, the Aviation Collegiate Education Club. These clubs are located at some of the major aviation universities throughout the United States, such as Purdue, Southern Illinois University, University of North Dakota, both campuses of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, St. Louis Parks College, and Western Michigan University. And many more are in the process of being set up as we speak. These clubs are run in part by ALPA volunteers who are go-team liaisons. But what makes this interesting is student involvement. At each university, there is an entire executive board set up to run the club and establish meetings between students and ALPA pilots like myself. At these meetings, we bring in pilots from the airlines and oftentimes focus on a specific topic or subject that the students at the university would like to hear. One example is international operations. We'll reach out to our extensive volunteer list and bring in pilots who fly internationally, or emergencies, in which we would bring in pilots who have had experiences or work in various aspects of safety within their airline. And of course, everyone's favorite, and my personal favorite, a day in the life, in which we bring in pilots from all different aspects of the aviation industry to talk about what a day in our life is like. In addition to this, many of the universities have set up, or in the process of setting up, mentorship programs in which a student is paired with a pilot so they have a go-to for any industry questions, advice, and to help retain interest in the profession. But one of the most unique aspects of all, about all of these ACE clubs, is that they can run independently from the university and from ALPA. I think that's a great example of the leadership they establish. With the great contacts that our pilots have to link up with the students, many of these schools have done fantastic outreach programs and events all on their own. A few examples. One of our programs has taken students to Orlando on several tours of JetBlue's facility, which involved getting simulator time. Others have gone on tour at Delta Airlines, United Airlines, and many airlines have even partnered with ACE clubs to bring in static display aircraft to an airport near the university to allow students to get an up-close and personal with the airline equipment and the pilots. These are just a few fantastic examples of how we outreach to attract people into the field of aviation and, more importantly, to retain the interest. As a student and co-founder of the Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University Daytona Beach Campus Club, I've seen the benefits from the student perspective, the student executive board perspective, and now from the other side as the airline pilot volunteering to help out the next generation. ALPA's Education Committee also volunteers with other community outreach. Every year, countless numbers of elementary schools, high schools, and other organizations reach out to ALPA, and the Education Committee is always excited to help. We have visited young students to help generate interest at a young age. We have gone to career days presentations at several high schools, and we have even conducted meetings, question and answer sessions at large events such as the National Intercollegiate Flying Association's Safety and Flight Evaluation Conference, just to name a few. This type of outreach is available to anyone. Our website, www.clearedtodream.org, offers many educational materials for those interested in being a pilot. It includes a section to reach out to one of our ALPA volunteers with any questions, as well as to ask an ALPA volunteer to attend an event or visit a school and to bring along with them several supplies. Our goal is to get out there and promote aviation with our enthusiastic volunteers to help bridge the gap and retain interest in being an airline pilot as a career and to build the future leaders within our industry. Thank you. I would now like to turn over the floor to Mrs. Morrison.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you so much to ALPA for inviting me to be here and for Cassandra for thinking of me to be a participant on this panel. My background is in education policy. I've spent a lot of time working for state departments of education, and what I've really enjoyed so far about this conference and the conversations is the connection between issues that other industries are facing that are very similar. With education, it's interesting that they have these same conversations about how to retain teachers, and it's very similar to what you guys are talking about with pilots. That being said, I work for the Ohio State University. I am the Career Eagles coordinator, and you're probably asking yourself, what the heck is Career Eagles? I've never heard of this program before. Well, that's because we're pretty brand new. I've been in my position for about 1.5 years, and it came about in discussions over whether or not there is this pilot supply issue. The Center of Aviation Studies at Ohio State, along with the private foundation and a couple of key players at EAA, met at Oshkosh a couple of years ago at AirVenture. And the conversation was about how do we take what we're doing at EAA with our wonderful First Flight program and then connect these students to other continuing aviation education activities. So many kids get very excited after they go on their first flight. Many of you know from your own experiences that first time you go up an airplane, how just amazing it is. And so what these kids were experiencing was wonderful, but there wasn't an activity after that took place to keep them engaged. And so hence my program, Career Eagles, came about. So when I came on board, they just hired me and said, you're going to go out there and create this program called Career Eagles. And I had no idea what that was going to look like. As I mentioned, my experience in aviation is fairly limited. I've got close family members and I have friends who I saw pursuing aviation. And one of the things that I really noticed about their experience was how difficult it can be if you know you want to pursue and be a part of the industry, but you can't find the resources that you need to enter it. You don't know what schools offer programs. You don't even know, most people think, well, the only thing you can do is be a pilot. And we all know you can be a controller, you can be an AMP, you can be in management. The industry is huge. And so when I started to think about this Career Eagles program and what I wanted it to look like, I really wanted to create something that was both meaningful and useful. And that came about again because of those folks that I had watched come through the program. So what I did was I started doing some research, and I really figured that Career Eagles could have sort of 3 main pillars as I look at it. And 2 of them we have really gotten quite good at, and the third is one that we're going to be launching this fall that I'm excited to share with you all today. The first component of this program is our youth aviation partnerships. We talk an awful lot about needing more outreach. I can assure everyone in this room there is a ton of aviation outreach going on. They're a wealth of programs doing incredibly amazing things. We all know EAA does their first flight program. I also volunteer with a program called Youth Aviation Adventure. That's where Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts can earn their merit badge in aviation. They operate in around 20-some cities in the country, doing large programs that are held twice a year. You have groups like Build a Plane that teaches students how to actually build their own aircraft. So those are just a couple of small examples, but I can assure everyone here that there's just a ton of great work going on. Barrington here is going to be talking about his awesome program, and I just learned about him a couple of weeks ago. So it's amazing what we are already doing. Now it's a matter of connecting the dots, and that's what that first component of my Career Eagles program is attempting to do. It's starting to engage other youth aviation outreach programs, trying to bring us all to the table and talking about, okay, what does this organization do and how can we support it? One of the most momentous things we've done this year is actually sign a memorandum of understanding with Youth Aviation Adventure so that we can formally collaborate, share resources, share curriculum, and get out there and get more kids exposed to the industry. The second component of Career Eagles is the one that I'm most familiar with, and that is what I like to call the education partnerships. Better utilizing what's going on already in schools. You know, and this last year I've been invited to numerous career fairs. Schools will contact you and say, hey, I never get a pilot to attend my career fair. I've never had an air traffic controller. And by being able to contact me at Career Eagles, I've been able to do that and provide them with different speakers to come talk to students about, you know, the industry and what they do for their job. Many of you have heard of STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And many schools are getting more involved in actually hosting what they call STEM days or STEM events. And they'll invite a significant number of people from the industry in engineering and aviation and just anybody who might fall within that field to come out and actually do activities with students to start engaging them at a young age. So not only does this connect the actual activities of aviation to something tangible in the classroom, it's also giving students the chance to meet someone who's in the industry, which I think is an incredibly key component of what we need to do in outreach, especially in education. You know, a guidance counselor can provide all the pamphlets on pursuing an aviation career that they want, whether it's pilot or ATC or some other part of the industry. But until they actually have that person in front of them to connect with, that's the key there. I think as we're considering the importance of outreach to addressing this pilot supply issue, one of the things we need to look at is how do we get the industry in front of these students more frequently so that they actually have someone that can mentor them. Maybe they go to an internship with this person. Maybe they just get a tour of their facilities with this individual. But actually giving these students something tangible to see and touch and do goes miles further than any camp they will ever attend. And lastly, and this ties in very well to what I was just talking about, Career Eagles is going to be launching a program this fall called the PreFlight Program. And what I kind of like to compare it to, because more people are familiar with this, is the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. And what this is going to be is a program designed for the high school student that says, I want to be a pilot, controller, management, AMP. How do I get there? By enrolling in Career Eagles, we're going to provide them mentorship opportunities, ground school opportunities, scholarships for private pilot ground, field trips. So it'll be a way for them to be guided through their entire high school career before they get to college, giving them a wealth of exposure to the industry. I know in the previous session, somebody was talking about or questioning, so how do we get those really rich, engaged students? How do we not just get the person with the credit card to come and become a professional in the industry? Well, I think my program will help with some of that. If you meet some kid in college who's gone through this Career Eagles pre-flight program, they've been mentored, they've got contacts, they've had capstone projects and internships, maybe they've done dual enrollment. You're gonna look at that student a lot more differently than some kid who just decided, one day that they want to become a pilot. And that's what we're trying to encourage students to do. We're trying to get them early on, trying to get them very real and valuable experience that they can actually take with them, and trying to mentor them and provide them with those resources that they might not otherwise have had. And lastly, kind of some food for thought, and maybe it'll turn into discussion later. I think it's going to be very important for the industry to think about outreach in a much broader perspective. We tend to hone in on how do we get kids involved, which is great, and I think that's going to be more vital than anything else. But I think we also need to start thinking about our communities and our parents, because let's face it, that sixth grader who wants to do aviation is not going to get there unless he's got some sort of parent or guardian help, whether it's monetary or just being support system to get there and to help them find those resources. So I think the more that we can engage with the community at large and with those parents, the more likely it is for them to turn around and say, hey, I get it, I understand why you want to be a pilot. Not to mention that just gives, Becky made the great point earlier about changing the conversation and making it more positive. We would go miles and miles to do community outreach to show people what the industry actually does economically, and just volunteering within the community. That would go a long way to help bring more kids into the industry as well. So thank you again for having me here.
Thank you, Shannon, on your insight. It's a fantastic program that you're working on, and I look forward to hearing it grow, as well as the conversations later at the end of this panel from what we've just heard discussed. Now I'd like to give the opportunity to Barrington to talk about some of his efforts.
Well, I'm honestly honored to be here. I'd like to thank ALPA. And in addition to that, I'll be remiss if I didn't recognize Jefferson, Shelley, and Cassandra for the opportunity to be here, and also for supporting a lot of what we do in working with students. And before I touch on some of the points, and I'm honored to be here with Shannon as well as Justin, I just quickly wanted to share how I got involved in aviation, what hooked me, what caused me to think about this industry, as well as what we're doing to replicate that on a larger scale. So in the first slide, you'll see, this is me as a child. I was born in Kingston, Jamaica, moved to Miami, Florida at the age of 6. Grew up in 2 of the 3 worst neighborhoods in Miami, Liberty City and Opelika, Florida. Of course, ironically, I grew up less than 2 miles from an airport where I lived, and less than 10 minutes from Miami International Airport, right? So aviation always surrounded me, but I never gave it any thought. While in high school, I was a dominant high school football player. That's me on the right-hand side. I played for a school that was ranked 3rd in the nation when we started, went on to be ranked #1 in the nation for football. Had a full scholarship to the University of Florida. I played fullback and linebacker, ran a 4.3 and a 40, and all these opportunities existed, and that's all I cared about. Until one day I was in the store minding my own business, and I see this guy walks in, and I didn't know what he did. He was dressed in his uniform, and it was my first time ever seeing a black pilot, or a pilot period, to be honest with you, outside of television. And I was trying to figure out what he did. And he saw that I was looking at him, and he approached me and said, "Hey son, have you ever thought about becoming a pilot?" My response to him was, "I don't think I'm smart enough to do that. That's not my type of deal." But coming from where I came from, I asked him one question. I said, "How much money do you make?" And after he answered that question, I took an interest in aviation, and interest became passion, and he then became my mentor, right? So what he sold me on was, here's an industry that's drastically different. No 2 days are alike. He spoke about the speeds he fly at, the altitude, the different places he visits. And at that time, he was piloting on the Boeing 777, is what he flew. So I was very impressed with him. And of course, you have to announce as an athlete when signing day comes, which collegiate team you'll play for. and I decided to turn down my football scholarship to the University of Florida. And in doing so, quite honestly, it felt like the dumbest decision at the time, but it was just a moment where I felt, man, this was just something amazing, something different. Let me give it a try. My coaches wanted me to have psychological evaluations. They thought something was wrong with me, and quite honestly, nothing was wrong with me. I just found something that I thought was amazing. And that's one of the gifts we have as aviators is we have airplanes. We have a dynamic industry, right? Things that go fast, make noise, and technology beyond belief. And that's what hooked me. I got involved in aviation after that. I then wanted to fly around the world because my mentor made me promise to give back, and I got flip it out the mouth. And I said, how could I possibly give back if I don't have any money? I mean, you know, what are you expecting from me? And he said, no, share time, share knowledge, share experiences. And that's what I did. And what you're looking at is the one pair of dress shoes I owned at the time, which I saved till this day to remind me where I came from. And you'll see 3 nice holes in the bottom of them. And I'd wear those shoes to different aviation events, approaching different sponsors. And proud to say Jefferson was one of the first to say, yes, we'll help and support you. And I was able to fly around the world. I did that in a Columbia 400, which you see on the left-hand side. And the journey took 97 days, 145 flight hours. Before the youngest person to fly around the world before me was 37 years of age. I was able to accomplish it at the age of 23 back in 2007. The record stood for 5 years. I've helped 2 other people to break my record, which I'm proud of as well. Now, that was great to fly around the world and have the Guinness World Record and so forth. But quite honestly, what was more inspiring is we had over 300,000 students who followed the flight. All I had was a simple blog. Didn't have social media or anything like that. I just had a simple blog and realized I had the attention of young people, but didn't know how to convert that. So here I am as a young person in the industry saying that I want to promote aviation. I want to impact kids. We have a nonprofit organization called Experience Aviation. And I honestly didn't know what I was doing. I just wanted to, A, understand the potential young people had, and how can you connect that with aviation? So, you know, you have great programs out there like Build a Plane, and we did a project where we challenged 60 kids from failing schools in Miami to build this experimental aircraft in 10 weeks. All right? All these kids were from failing schools. They built it in 10 weeks, and we flew it on its first flight. A young lady on the left-hand side, Bakari, when she started with me, couldn't point out a 16th of an inch on a ruler, now on a full scholarship as a math major. A young man on the right-hand side, when he started with us, it took him 2 hours to figure out how to turn on a vacuum. Right? He thought the red button meant do not touch. Now he's disarming high-level bombs in the military, and he's alive and well doing it. Right? And then we got into other things, but still utilizing aerodynamics. I challenged middle school students to build a car faster than a Ferrari 430 Spider. This was the car that they built, and so forth. So I realized, okay, students have the potential. What's the issue? What's the real challenge? I realized a few things. Number one, when it comes to education, we're dealing with an industry in all respect to educators, but you're dealing with an industry where the education industry is one of few industries that have no clue how to communicate to its customer. They have no clue how to communicate to its customer, which is the student as well as the teacher. But then you have another challenge from the aviation side and aerospace side. As Shannon mentioned, there are tons of great aviation programs out there. But there's also a huge disconnect. And I think the only ones that's been very successful at this is Civil Air Patrol, where there's a huge gap between industry and the classroom. A huge gap between industry and the classroom. What exactly do I mean? Most math and science teachers, for example, in the state of Florida, 83% of math and science teachers have no professional background in those fields. This is what we're dealing with. You have teachers that are teaching on various subjects such as math and science, and most of them have no professional background in any of those fields. How could we possibly expect them to be able to introduce various industries such as STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, which Justin mentioned earlier as well. So in recognizing this, I wanted to figure out a way to get our industry directly in the classroom. And here's the reason why, here's a challenge, I should say, that we have in getting aviation and aerospace into the classroom. We don't speak their language. What exactly do I mean by that? We don't speak their language. Think about it. There's tons of great aviation programs out there. How many of them are actually aligned to national academic standards? Well, you might say, well, what does that have to do with anything? Right? Why do we need to align content to national standards? Well, guess what? If you want a teacher in this day and age to introduce aviation to students, not at the high school level. High school, they can get away with it a bit more. But at the middle and elementary school level, if your content isn't aligned to national academic standards, they will never touch it. So we have a huge breakdown where here's an industry that wants to engage young people. And we know we have the power to do that. And then you have another industry from the education side that has no clue of how to engage their students. And I saw that as an opportunity to create a program, actually to create a curriculum called the Flying Classroom. So you'll see what we did was we transformed a Hawker 400 XP into a real-life Magic School Bus. I'm also a National Geographic explorer, and I travel to different parts of the world conducting various types of expeditions, but utilizing aviation as my vehicle to do so, as well as highlighting aviation as expedition features in some of the adventures. When we started out on this, of course, there were the few who believed, and then there were others saying, how are you going to work this? How can you be directly in schools and then do other things? Guess what? The industry I learned from in the last 5 years that has mastered this and have set the model for every single person in the room is the tech industry. What exactly am I talking about? 5 years ago, young people could care less about coding. Now it's what everyone talks about. Why is that? Because they figured out a way of how to sell an industry to schools. Now every kid, what do you want to do? Oh, I want to code. Did that just come about because they're watching a lot of TV shows and so forth? No. They figured out a way to empower educators to become the ones who can introduce complex STEM subject matter without being a STEM subject matter expert. It's like using iTunes. They simplified the process of integration. And that's what we tried to do at the Flying Classroom, and last year we had huge success with it. This is my co-pilot, Tom. Last year we flew through various countries from North America, Asia, Australia, Indonesia, Micronesia. We conducted 16 expeditions, right? So we leveraged the fact that schools want to engage their students, and we took the amazing industry of aviation to stand in the gap and to allow us to conduct expeditions in different parts of the world. Now, what exactly do I mean? Here's an example. Anyone in here ever heard of the Bionic Chef? Okay, don't worry. Most teachers haven't either. Matter of fact, most teachers can't even tell you or share with students how to teach on the topic of biomedical engineering. So what we did was we took the STEM industry and we found an amazing story, because all of us, every single person in this room, is a storyteller. All right? And in doing so, the Bionic Chef, here's a guy who was out hunting for food one day, saw a dead bear lying on the ground, thought that was kind of weird. He knew the bear was dead because he could smell it, took out his knife, went to touch the bear, didn't realize what killed the bear was a down power line. 2,400 volts went through his body, blew off his arm, burned 4 of his ribs. You get where the story is going? What kid wouldn't say, man, that's amazing? All right? Anything that has to do with speed, death, different types of amazing challenges is what kids are into. So we flew out, we met with him, we conducted an expedition, and they fitted him with a bionic hand as well as bionic arms that communicates with his brain very similar to how your cell phone communicates with Wi-Fi. So he's able to continue his duties as a chef, and whatever he thinks in the kitchen, his bionic hand can do. We took this expedition, created curriculum around it, and as aviators, what are we selling to people? What are we selling to people? I'm sorry? Adventure. True. What else are we selling? Time. We are in the business of selling time. And I realized that, and I said, well, what if I package a curriculum in a way using aviation where I'm selling teachers time? That's the business we're in. So you'll see in the slide that in selling teachers time, there's no work that they have to do, right? The lesson overview, the real world problems, the essential questions, all the stuff you have to do to align a curriculum to standards, a teacher could walk in, adopt our curriculum, immediately implement it without being a subject matter expert. We utilize aviation to leverage that. Okay, here's another one we did with Sean Tucker. This one was just solely focused on math. But it all came down to the presentation, the package, right? How are we selling our industry to students? This was another one that we did. What are we looking at? A shoe, right? 3D printed shoe, that's correct. Nike, Adidas, and New Balance has figured out a way where no longer you'll have to go to a department store to buy a brand new pair of shoes. You'll be able to 3D print a brand new pair of shoes from your home and walk out of your house with it. These are the amazing things that students want to know, but I also link aviation to it in order to explore it. Okay? What is this one? This one we did focused on volcanoes. Took off the doors of a helicopter, hovered about 15 feet above lava at 2,400 degrees, and did a number. I know the FAA might be here, we'll talk about it later. But we were able to successfully conduct that expedition as well. We utilize aviation as a strong tool to get into this island, Palau. What are we looking at here? Sea snakes. Very deadly creature. When we did this expedition, they have a strong belief, a very strong belief, that you cannot bring anti-venom into the country. The sea snake is viewed as a god. So if you mess with them and you get bit, well, guess what? By the gods, you were meant to die on that day. That's how it works. Now, what's special about this from a scientific end? In this video, I think we have to start over the video. Let's see. It's a cool video. There's a genetic arms race that's occurring between the sea snake and the eel. What exactly do I mean? Scientists in New Guinea was able to prove that every single birth, the venom from the sea snake is getting stronger, and the resistance from the eel is getting stronger as well. Right now you're watching a sea snake eating an eel that's twice its size. Why is this special for us as human beings? Because of this genetic arms race, we're going to be able to cure more diseases. Now I'll explain why shortly after you watch this. This was our #1 video, by the way, for students. Because I'm not a sea snake expert, it was at this point where I was tapping everybody else, and like, a brother gotta go, right? I was getting really anxious. I thought it was barking at us, but it was just actually burping, because it spent half its time on land and half its time in the ocean, right? This is us taking blood directly from the heart of the snake. That's my National Geographic friend Zoltan. And what scientists have been able to figure out, thanks to Zoltan, is by altering the DNA as well as the venom from the sea snake, you can fight against heart attacks and heart disease. All right? This is the power of our our industry, right? And in understanding why exactly, the flying classroom last year we worked with, I think it was 47 schools. This year we already have over 200 schools across the nation. Oh, I'm sorry, over 250 schools across the nation that's signing up for this. What is it we're doing as it relates to aviation? Yes, some of our expeditions focus directly on aviation, which teachers love. But in other examples, aviation is also subliminally tied in as the vehicle to transport our team, or to be able to overcome different challenges and situations to travel to different places. What are we actually doing? What are we accomplishing from a selfish perspective as relates to my love for aviation? We figure out a way to sell our industry to schools without them even realizing it. All right? Most teachers, when it comes to aviation, they're intimidated. Most teachers, oh no, the math is above my head, the science behind it is above my head. When, okay, the very same things that you're teaching in the classroom, such as Newton's laws or Bernoulli principles or whatever the case may be, exist in our industry as well. It's all about the packaging and the presentation of our industry to the classroom. Now, Shannon spoke about something that's very important as it relates to the pipeline. All right? When I played football, from the moment you play Pop Warner to the NFL, there's a path for you. And there's a path for you in a number of different sectors. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make as aviators is what we try to sell is one-sided. Not everyone's going to be a pilot at first. We have a dynamic and an amazing industry that we can leverage and sell to students as well as schools. And these are some of the things that I learned, and I'm very grateful for this industry. This industry has changed the quality of my life. Of course, we all know we have some challenges, but everyone is, yes, we have to get into the classroom, but the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we're able to speak the language of educators. That's the major issue that we have. Civil Air Patrol has a model, right, that works directly in the schools. And we decided to also look at that model, but create it in a way where any teacher can share our industry with their students. And that's what we need more of. There's tons of great organizations out there, but look at the coding, look what the tech industry did with coding and getting that into classrooms. We can do the same, and honestly, I believe we can have greater results because what we do is much cooler. Right? And that's something I firmly believe. So I thank you guys for the opportunity to share a little bit of my journey and my experience in aviation.
Oftentimes we talk about pay, but what about the lifestyle of being a pilot? Do you find that that plays any type of important role in attracting students to the industry or even to their parents? How have you seen that play out in your work, Shannon?
Yeah, I definitely think it does, and it's interesting. One of the things, just to pinpoint a very specific item that I've noticed about students that I'm working with now, is how many of them want a job that allows them opportunities to give back to their community. So, whether it's they work for American Electric Power, but then they get so many days off a year to go volunteer. That's really key for a lot of students now. Is just and actually I think this works to the aviation industry's advantage. So if you have these students who really want to give back, they get into the cockpit, they get their job at the regional, they get their job as an air traffic controller, but they're allowed times to go back out to the community. That just only ends up working in our favor to increase the knowledge that people have of the industry. So I think to sort of answer your question, one of the things I've really noticed a difference with is just how much these students really want to be engaged in their community long term, and not just picking a career to pick a career.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, one, I think we should just be honest about it, right? As far as what the challenges are, and by being honest about, okay, what it's like to be an airline pilot and some of the sacrifices that you have, that emphasizes even more why it's important you need to have a head start, right? After you graduate school, the next 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of your life is important, but that's the greatest period of time for you to take calculated risks in order to advance yourself professionally. And I think we could do a better job of just honestly, being honest about it, and B, in the honesty, also communicate, just like any other industry. You're taking a calculated risk to advance yourself professionally, and it's the right time to do so. And that's what I try to do with the students that I work with. It is an issue, but you know, it's the same thing. If you're locked up in a dorm room studying to become a lawyer for the next 6, 8 years, you know, you're losing the same amount of time as it relates to what you want to accomplish professionally.
Thank you. I do have one more question I'd like to ask Barrington, and then we'll open it up to the floor. You mentioned that oftentimes you use aviation as the catalyst to present these other topics. How important do you feel is industry knowledge? How many people have perhaps had an interest in one of the expeditions that you've done that then heard about the aviation aspect of it and have now become intrigued because they didn't know about it prior?
I mean, honestly, as a pilot, and of course I love pilots, I'm always with pilots, it's probably the biggest mistake that we make. It's that it's the first thing we try to sell, and oftentimes it's the only thing we try to sell about our industry. And I think we're dealing with a different generation that's very savvy about their decision making. Of course, you see that in corporate America. But in addition to that, I also think that we're dealing with the challenge of in wanting to get, there's so many other options, right? You have universities, for example, with drone programs. There are more kids signing up to fly drones in some universities than to actually fly an airplane, right? And of course, those comes with pros and cons, but also at the same time, there's so many different aspects of our industry. We have electrical airplanes that's here and more of them that's coming, right? So to be able, look at the amount of students that pursue engineering, for example, on a national scale. How many of them consider aviation or aerospace? Very few. Why is that? Most guidance counselors in schools honestly don't have a clue of what type of engineering fields exist, also in commonality in other industries, like being an electrical engineer. You can apply that to aviation as well. And I think that's something communication-wise that's important, that we have to remember. There's so many different aspects of our industry we should be selling that's special. And quite honestly, I have a number of students who go off into pursuing the industry, you know, into, yes, they want to become a pilot, but maybe they'll do air traffic control first. Then they're working on their flight licenses, and then they want to become a pilot. So I think the avenues have changed a little bit.
We're just about out of time here. I'd like to say thank you again to Barrington as well as Shannon for attending on our panel today, and thank you all again for attending.
Thank you.
And at this time, I'll pass it back to Captain Paul Ryder.
Thank you very much, Justin, Shannon, Barrington. You've given us a lot of information and many successful ways to attract the next generation of airline pilots to STEM and to aviation in particular. Wow, great discussion, and I hope that we can engage some of our audience with our panelists on building relationships that can continue this outreach more effectively moving forward.